I have a number of slides to go through here. We'll also be posting them on the website. There's a little bit of information at the end of this presentation that talks about other resources. So if there's something you have that you see here that you want to learn more about, there's some ways you can find out about it. So a few highlights, goals, and challenges with regard to the FY23 budget. The proposed property tax rate of $14.3123 per thousand of taxable value is the same as last year. The city's tax rate was the same for 10 consecutive years, a little at the 13.5277 rate. This would be the third year at that 14.3123 rate. We are proposing a water user rate increase and a solid waste user rate increase, and there will be more about that on a future slide. So the chief goals in the budget are to pass a balanced budget, maintain the property tax when at all possible, maintain sufficient fund balances in all the funds, and provide high-quality public services to our citizens and businesses. The challenges, as always, are generally rising costs, planning for future needs. That's an important part of what we do in this process. And then for FY 21, 22, and 23, the financial and planning impacts or outcroppings of the COVID pandemic. In 23's budget, I think we can safely say that as long as nothing changes, there are lesser impacts, but they are there. A little bit about property taxation in Iowa. Property is categorized into classes, each with varying taxing procedures. So residential, multi-residential was new in FY17, commercial, industrial, utilities, and ag. Cities don't usually have a lot of agricultural land. Coralville has just a little bit. There are growth limitations in the taxable value of each class to reduce dramatic tax shifts between the classes, and the reductions are accomplished through a limitation called a rollback. So this is the rollback and its change in FY23 versus 22. So you can see the residential class went down 2.2792. And this is, keep in mind, these are the numbers in each of these columns that are the percentage of the assessed value that is taxed. So one mathematical oddity of a change in a percentage is that the 2.28% decrease in the residential, for instance, is about a 4% decrease in that number when you think about it, because it's about half of 100. So keep that in mind as well. Multi-residential went down per a schedule of reductions until it meets the residential, which is the row above, and then it'll be the same. And then commercial and industrial stayed the same. Ag changed, but again, not much of Coralville is in the ag sector. Here's a chart over time since FY92 of the rollback. So you can see residential in blue. It's fallen generally, but it rose a little bit in the past decade or so. But it's fallen from about 80% since that time to where it is now. And then commercial industrial is that rust brown colored line at the top. Ag is the green, and then multi-residential is the short black line that just goes diagonally down since FY17. So a residential property assessed at $100,000 in Coralville, not that that's the average, but that's a handy, easily multiplied figure. That taxable value due to that residential rollback decreases in the coming fiscal year by $944. So with the same tax rate, that taxpayer pays, all things equal, ignoring the rest of their tax bill that goes to other jurisdictions, $32.62 less over the course of the fiscal year than in FY22, the current fiscal year. Since the commercial and industrial rollback stayed the same as they normally do, the tax rate staying the same, the property tax payment of a taxpayer would stay the same. So the commercial property tax reform legislation of 2013, so that's almost a decade ago now, so why talk about it, right? The short version of this slide is that the state made up the difference for local governments due to a reduction in the rollback for commercial and industrial properties. That's part A. Part B is the state giveth, the state taketh away. They passed legislation to phase out the backfill payments to local governments. That's about $1,483,000 for Coralville in the current fiscal year. It'll be phased out in FY23 to 29. It is dispersed. That $1,483,000 is divided among several funds at the city, and so it comes out of the general fund, the debt service fund, and the TIF funds in FY22. In FY23 and beyond, it's simply the general fund and the debt service fund. The city tax levy has several components: the general, the tort or insurance, a transit levy, the trust and agency, and debt service levies. If you add all of those together, except for the debt service levy, you have what I call operating levies and a debt service levy. So this compares the 23 proposal to the FY22 actual. So you see no change in proposed property tax rates for debt or operations. This slide takes the total property tax bill for a typical Coralville resident, and there's 2 school districts that serve Coralville, so I arbitrarily chose a resident that lives in the Iowa City Community School District. But it shows the tax rates and uses the proposed City of Coralville FY23, which is the same as our current 22 rate, and just assumes the same rates for others going forward on that tax bill, which is our best estimation at this time. And so that $14.31 basically is for the city of Coralville is out of a total property tax rate of almost $37. And if you look at that a different way, it's about 39% of the tax bill. The Iowa City Schools and Johnson County represent the other larger pieces of that, which is typical for cities in Iowa. We just went through the maximum levy notice and hearing process. One thing to keep in mind is that hearing notice and it's governed by state law and regulations, what is on there. It does show some things and it does not show some things. Don't take away from that the total tax rate will be what it says on there. It excludes some levies. For us, that basically means the debt levy. So it talks about the operating levies and the tax rate for those. In the general fund, which is the city's chief operating funds, the revenue sources are taxes, both property tax and hotel motel mainly, licenses and permits, like building permits and rental housing inspection permits, and use of money and property. So that's interest and rental income. Intergovernmental revenues, grants and contracts between Coralville and other local governments. Charges for services like rec programs, and then transfers and borrowings and other sources. So the estimated revenue in the FY23 budget proposal is approximately $29.5 million. That's about a 5.5% increase from the current year's general fund revenue. So that supports the areas and departments that I've listed here. You know, public safety, so fire, police, health, social services, culture and recreation, so the library, the rec department, parks department, community and economic development, and then general governmental functions like clerk and finance, legal, costs, administration, and contingencies. So we boil down the revenues on this slide, and then we'll take a look at expenditures in the general fund on the next. But this gives you a sort of scale of how much comes from which sources in the current and prior year, I'm sorry, the FY23 and FY22 budgets on the revenue side of the general fund. So you can see most of it comes in the way of property taxes and excise taxes. And hotel motel tax is about the fourth row, 9%, down from about 11.5% a few years ago before COVID, but rebounding. You know, it's on its way back, it seems. And then on the departmental expenditure side of the proposal for the general fund, you see park and rec and public safety near the top, which I suspect is no surprise to the council and staff and mayor, and then library and contingencies, transfers, and other. It's relatively high up in the list, but it's an aggregation of a lot of different things. We also have a couple of special revenue funds. The most prominent one is probably the road use tax fund, or the streets department is another name for it. So state road use tax is allocated to cities by the state of Iowa based on the latest official census. The 2020 census count was 22,318, up 18% from the 2010 figure. The DOT publishes projected dollars per capita for cities to use in budgeting of road use tax distributions. So $126.50 per capita is their official projection for FY23. So we're expecting a little over 2.8 million in road use taxes. So then, and we have some other, at the top of this, you'll see some other revenues and equipment reserves usage make up the resources side of our proposed streets fund budget this year of $3.648 million. And then the expenditures are shown at the bottom. So most of it goes to roadway maintenance projects and general maintenance. And then we have snow, traffic safety, street lighting, engineering, and cleaning. And then other is, again, an amalgamation of a few categories there. We have several enterprise funds at the city of Coralville. Public transit, parking, stormwater, and wastewater are four where there's no proposed user rate change for the upcoming budget year. But we do have a proposed increase in user rates for water and solid waste. So the water rate increase is summarized here. We have residential and commercial rates, and we have a monthly minimum regardless of usage, and then an additional amount for amounts above 200 cubic feet. And so you see those outlined here. This is the first of several anticipated increases for water to add capacity, make sure we can meet demand. Solid waste is another area where we're looking at a proposed increase. So that increase is to fund operating costs and compensate for lower values for recyclable materials. Again, it's the first of a few increases that we anticipate having to make in solid waste. And I would say the challenging areas in the budget, both with regard to FY23 and maybe for a couple years thereafter, that I would highlight in this presentation are for solid waste and public transit. So with solid waste, we're facing generally costs increase over time, and we last addressed user fees, and by addressed I mean increased them. We always look at them each budget cycle, but we last increased them in 2016. We have increasing costs from the recycling drop site, and we have recyclable materials values fluctuating. They seem to fluctuate down more often than up over the years. There are materials that we're having to pay to get rid of now just to have them removed, whereas we used to actually receive checks for some of them. And then in public transit, we have declining ridership, which means lower fare revenue, excuse me. We have increases in the costs of the paratransit service. The one-time federal funding is projected to last through FY24. Most of that is tied to the COVID situation. So we expect that to last through FY24, which is really, it sounds further away than it is. It's really the next budget after the one we're working on right now. There's some things the proposed FY23 budget includes. It includes a lot of things, but these are maybe some notable ones. Replacement of a paratransit bus, fire protection equipment, station furnishings, street repairs, patching and sealing. Solid waste is replacing a garbage truck. And in the library, we've got AV equipment in the children's storytime room and public laptops and teen area furniture replacement. So in the way of an overview of the enterprise funds, they're listed on this slide, and we show sources and uses of funds. And then timing and additional information. So the Connection magazine, I got mine in my mailbox today. So that is arriving in mailboxes this week. And it's also available online, coralville.org//connection. At the February 22nd meeting, we'll hold a public hearing on the overall budget. We would anticipate at the March 8th meeting, the City Council will consider adopting the budget, and it'll be filed with the Johnson County Auditor and the state prior to March 31st and be effective July 1st, 22 through June 30th, 23. And then I list several places you can get, and the public can also get additional information on the budget proposal down below.